Afternoon, big brother.
We are the Stinemetz brothers, and we call ourselves the Pseudo Scholars. This podcast is our schoolhouse, and each week we're going to be grappling with our own realities by exploring the stuff that interests us.
Stuff like what's the future of space exploration, or why do human beings commit suicide, or what makes the NFL New England Patriots so much better than everybody else. So we're going to break down these kinds of ideas. We're going to challenge conventional thinking. And then hopefully everyone, including us, is going to walk away a little more informed, a little more stimulated, and a little more inspired.
Yeah, that's right. And this week, we've been really fascinated by martial arts, specifically Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So for those who don't know, a few weeks ago, Cade started training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I guess it's been about 8 weeks now, Cade. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going really well. It has been an absolutely kind of insane experience. Excited to kind of share with everyone a little bit about what I've been learning. But Shane, kind of give us a little bit of background into kind of what martial arts is, because we know that jiu-jitsu is just one branch of it. So give us a little bit more context to kind of set up kind of our conversation.
Yeah, sure. I'm no historian, but I have had a bit of experience in the martial arts. Specifically in the grappling arena, so that would be jiu-jitsu. But I've always been fascinated with, what it is to compete one-on-one against another individual. And there's all these other various activities in which we might be doing that, like chess, the ultimate intellectual battle. But with martial arts, it's intellectual, but it's also really physical. And I want to unpack that a bit more and explore that a bit more. But people have been doing this as long as they've walked the earth. Doing a little bit of research beforehand, prehistoric man drew cave drawings depicting two images of, big muscular type men fighting each other. Why they were fighting each other, we don't really know necessarily, whether they were competing over their latest kill, to eat that night, or whether they were fighting over a mate. Who knows exactly, because we see it in nature as well. But really, since the dawn of time, men and perhaps women as well have wanted to compete and demonstrate each other's physical capabilities. And there is really no greater challenge than seeing two people inside an arena of some kind battling it out. And that's where martial arts maybe came to fame, the Roman Colosseum and the era of the gladiator, in which literally two men were put in there and only one man walked out alive. So, the history of martial arts has broadened since then. We've gotten a lot more skillful, and now there's all these various schools out there. So kind of in East Asia, especially in the Southeast Asia region, you have Thai kickboxing, which would be a striking art. And then in Japan, where judo was initiated, the Chinese have also started a few various forms of martial arts. And then to the West, more famous for Western boxing, like we would see like a Mike Tyson kind of boxer, which started in the UK probably. They still have a history of bare knuckles brawling. There's just an enormous history of martial arts that's gone on, as I said, since the dawn of time. But Cade, I want to talk a little bit more about jiu-jitsu. I know you and I are already probably on the same page in presuming that jiu-jitsu is the superior art when it comes to self-defense. And that's for a number of reasons. But tell us a little bit about what you've learned regarding Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, one particular Brazilian school.
Yeah. So Shane, you bring up Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and Gracie is really just the last name of a Brazilian family that's really kind of credited with starting what we know in the Western world as Jiu-Jitsu today. But just to give everyone a little bit of historical context here, and if you want to take a deeper dive into some of the resources online, I completely encourage it because it is absolutely fascinating. But essentially, there's a Brazilian family with a couple of sons in the family, Carlos and Helio, and there was a big migration from Japan. I can't remember what the geographical reasons were for them migrating, but essentially, a bunch of Japanese had come and colonized in an area of Brazil, and one of the Gracie fathers was a politician and had some kind of rapport and helped them get acclimated to the new society. And I think he set them up with jobs and handled just a lot of the relational newness of a migrating family. So the Japanese family, in exchange for these kind of duties and a little bit of a quid pro quo exchanged, just said, hey, well, I'll train your sons in jiu-jitsu. That's what I can offer them. And that really isn't the jiu-jitsu that we know. It's a little bit more rustic, a little bit more about strength and about being a really strong, big, physical, imposing person. But essentially, this guy trained these two brothers, Carlos and Helio, and that's where we get all of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu that started way back when in the 20s. And so these two brothers literally began a revolution. And Helio was really the most famous of the brothers. And what he did was take jiu-jitsu, take kind of the hardness, the rustic Japanese approach, and merge it with the Brazilian culture, which was a little more free-flowing, a little more nonchalant in some ways. And he was 140 pounds. And so he said, hey, being strong and learning these holds, that only works so well for me because there are other guys that are bigger and stronger. And at the end of the day, I can't win with that. At ceteris paribus, I'm going to get my tail whooped because I'm just not superior in that form. So he started to adapt it. He started to change it to where jiu-jitsu became the way for smaller men or smaller people to defend themselves from larger people. And so it became all about technique and really not about strength, not about a kind of a more simple type of let me go and impose my will on your will. And what they found is that as they refined this through fights, and it was called the Gracie Challenge, where they would literally open up ads in the newspaper and say, hey, if you want to brawl, come on. And what's so fascinating about this, Shane, is that it was like science. It was like an art form. They didn't care if they got their arm broken or their eye bruised or they lost a couple of teeth. It was all about the art form, and it was about renewing it and cultivating it and making it better and better. And so when you think about the Gracie family after that, you just have to go onto the Wikipedia page to find out there are 26 sons between these two brothers. And so they didn't start a family. They started an army of Gracie believers whose literally their job, their calling on their life was to spread the gospel of jiu-jitsu to the world, because they said, this is the form. I mean, we really believe that this is superior to all other forms of martial arts. So that's just a little bit about the history, but it's really an incredible art. And what got me into it really was hearing about some of your experiences. So Shane was a Marine officer. He was an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. He's 0302. And he had some experience for the both of us when it came to getting into martial arts that really kind of bled into my world, made me interested in this whole thing called jiu-jitsu. But Shane, tell us a little bit about your experience in the Marine Corps, maybe some other forms of martial arts, and then how that got you into Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as we know it today.
Yeah, sure. For me, it all started when I was on my very first day at the infantry officers course, which is kind of a grueling grounds of punishment for the new Marine Corps infantry officers to prove themselves. You know, we've been selected against our peers to become infantry officers, but now is the time to actually get trained, screened, and then ultimately assigned, this new MOS signature 0302 is just a number indicator saying that we're Marine infantry officers. So this is the screening grounds. And on the very first day, without alluding too much into the secrecy behind the schooling that we had to go through, there was serious ground fighting. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Serious ground fighting. So we were partnered up in front of instructors, often against instructors of equal size or greater size. It didn't matter. And that's one of the things I love about jiu-jitsu and that we'll talk about more. But you were partnered up and allowing like a little bit of slapping, to the face, but essentially it was all ground fighting or grappling, which I guess we haven't said specifically yet is what jiu-jitsu is about. Jiu-jitsu is about chokes and holds and leverage to control your partner so that ultimately you can either end the fight and get away or injure the partner or your fighter, competitor enough to where you can get away. So that's really the premise behind jiu-jitsu. But so here we were on our first day of training, and we're partnered up with guys that we've never looked at in the eyes before. And they're saying, you're going head to head, and only one of you is going to walk away as the victor. The other will be the loser in the eyes of all the instructors and in the eyes of all the peers. So that's an intense environment, as you can imagine. So I went head to head with a guy. He was a little bit smaller than me. I knew a bit about wrestling because Cade, we always wrestled growing up. We'd wrestle our dad. We'd wrestle each other. I mean, you and I have been fighting since we were born, fighting each other, fighting our friends, but we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't have any technique to it. So I just went with pure ambition and, full on energy at this guy. And luckily my energy was enough because he wasn't a skilled jiu-jitsu fighter or really a skilled grappler of any kind. Shortly thereafter, I went against a wrestler who had wrestled at Oklahoma and got my butt kicked. He was probably 20 pounds lighter than me, but he just knew how to use his weight. Despite the fact that I might have been stronger, he knew how to use his weight and propel me off of him, get control of the fight. So that was kind of my first introduction into ground fighting. And after you get your butt kicked for the first time, you realize there's a lot of room for improvement. I want to get good at this. I like this whole idea of being able to, dominate other people in the event that they were trying to dominate me. It's a combat of will. One person's will against another person's will. So one other pretty fun story left over from the Marine Corps in this school, the infantry officers course, we'd have full-on team fights. So we'd have competitions in which our entire class of, let's say, 100 students was broken up. 50 students would be on one side of a football field. 50 students would be on the other side of the football field. One guys would be wearing green shirts. The other team would be wearing tan shirts. And it would literally be a ground fight, 50 on 50. You start on your knees and you essentially attack each other and use whatever strategy you can as a team of 50 to try to submit as many of the other team members as possible. And then whichever team is left standing, i.e. there's one man left standing from one of those teams, that person would represent the team and that team would win. So the idea is, to kind of get 2-on-1s or 3-on-1s and do whatever you can to submit your opponents. So the way you submit an opponent, is to put them in a hold, some kind of leverage that would potentially either break their arm, the common technique of the arm bar or the leg lock, and put your opponent in a position where they can immediately feel that if you were to extend that position any greater, that person's leg or that person's arm is going to be snapped. And therefore they have to tap. Once you tap, you're out. Same thing with the choke. Once the choke goes on, you're applying a strong choke, air choke of some kind. Once that opponent can no longer breathe and realizes they're about to go out, they either tap out or they pass out. And those guys are dead. So here we are, 50 on 50. And our team ended up having like 3 guys left standing. And naturally, we had to complete the entire opposing team. So that's like a pretty intense experience and where I realized I want to get a lot better at this. But Cade, you've just now started jiu-jitsu. So I've had a bit of time to then go on and practice the art of jiu-jitsu itself. I also got to fight in a big competition, the US Open of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So I've had like a little bit more experience in this. And I've used the techniques on you and you felt the techniques. What's it like getting armbarred when you have no idea what's going on?
Yeah, it's not the funnest experience, I can tell you that. And what's so cool about your story as I'm sitting here listening to it is, obviously, Marine officer, a bunch of infantry officers, something very practical to be training for, right? The potential of having to use these techniques in real life. But you need to look no further than the industry, the business of jiu-jitsu, to say that people are just freaking obsessed with measuring themselves against somebody else. It's just an absolute obsession. I mean, look at the UFC and all the big fights that have been happening recently and the size of these purses, that it's just absolutely booming as an industry because there's something that is just so incredibly fascinating about testing yourself, about measuring yourself, about looking at someone else in the eyes and say, this is the most honest thing that we can do. We can lay aside all technology, all weapons, and we have our minds and we have our extremities to try to do battle and see who can conquer someone else. And to be honest, it's probably hard to tell from the webcast and from the video, but Shane is sizably bigger than me, probably by 20, 30 pounds. Maybe not quite that much, maybe 15, 20 pounds and several inches in height. And so as brothers and being competitive and having my tail whooped many, many times, for Shane to learn a technique along with his size advantage was really kind of the worst of both worlds for me, so to speak. And so I've got to say, I'd be a liar if that didn't contribute, at least in somewhat, to my own initiative saying, what the heck, I'm going to go and I'm going to figure out how to train this stuff because I'm tired of getting my tail whooped. And just kind of to speak a little bit more to the practical side of jiu-jitsu, right, that this is a self-defense. That at its most basic and rudimentary form, this is about self-defense. This is not about flashy competitions. There is that side to it, but that's not in its most primitive form. And so I live at an apartment complex in Houston, Texas, and I can tell you, crimes are committed all the time. We get an email from our apartment complex manager saying that someone's been robbed on the 3rd floor of my apartment complex. I'm like, oh, shoot, what would I do? And if there's one thing that I've learned from watching fights or seeing fights happen, on the streets or at school or, kind of on the ball field when 2 guys lose their aggression, is usually the superior thinker is going to be superior in the fight. And so that's kind of what got me excited about jiu-jitsu, is that this is not about brute strength. This is not about, needing to change my body. This is about learning how to use my body in the most efficient and effective way as kind of currency. What's the most I can get for what I have that's a part of me already?
Yeah, and I think that's where all of a sudden this subject matter hits home for more individuals than just the Marine infantry officers. Obviously, I was training my Marines for that potential day where they're in a fighting hole with someone in the Taliban who comes through and somehow breaks through the lines, and now a Marine is in a hand-to-hand situation. We want to make sure that we're in a better position to submit the opponent, to kill the opponent in that case. But how does this hit home for the average person? Like for you, Cade, you're a corporate guy. You work at Phillips 66. You got a fantastic job, a fantastic wife, live in a nice city of Houston. But what happens on that one particular day when you and Emily are walking down the street and some guy, tries to mug you or tries to take Emily's purse or perhaps commits a mugging just across the street, and you're able to watch this entire thing take place? The idea of building up some basic level skills in self-defense makes so much sense for everyone of all ages, of all strengths, of all sexes. But I want to talk a little bit more about what it was like for you, essentially a newbie with very limited experience in legitimate martial arts, walking through the door on that first day and seeing all these warriors, these black belts, these guys who'd been fighting and training their whole lives, whether it was in Brazil or in the United States, really doesn't make any difference. That can be a little bit of an overwhelming environment. What was it like for you?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So when I kind of picked up the phone and decided, okay, here's an MMA gym just down the street from me. They train Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I'm going to go check out, see what it's all about. I will say the culture of jiu-jitsu, the family atmosphere, is something that's a little disarming. And it's part of the most attractive things that's just created this gravitational force towards Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. But you walk into the gym, and I'm training with this guy named Hai Nguyen. Hai got his black belt back in 2006, so just slightly advantage to me when it comes to his jiu-jitsu and martial art experience. And so essentially, he's just kind of like, okay, we're going to start grappling. We're going to start doing some things. I want to see how your body responds. I want to see how you move. And essentially he was trying to size me up to know me, where I start off in the classes and what tier I am and things like that. And of course I'm starting at ground zero. We didn't need a lesson to teach anyone that. But what was so cool is that as I'm sitting with him, and these are all techniques. We're on a mat. We're in gym shorts. We know nobody's going to get hurt if we use the right techniques. But the first thing he says is, you're at a gas station. A guy comes up to you. He's acting a little bit hostile. His fists are clenched. What are you going to do? And immediately we're not even in the context of this situation. And my mind is just melted. It's just goo because I haven't been trained how to think in this situation. I'm like, oh, what did I do? I don't know. I get back in my car. I run away. I punch him. I grab for something, and I think about if we're not trained, if we can't do anything with our bodies to defend ourselves, it's like walking around with a gun without any bullets in the chamber. It's the same thing, right? If you're not going to walk around with a gun, you have no arm, you've got to have some bullets in the chamber with your body. You got to have a sense of what you're going to do to try to escape without getting hurt. So anyways, a bit unnerving. I spent the next 30, 45 minutes getting thrown onto my back, but then also learning some chokes, learning some holds, learning some just kind of slight manipulation, learning about efficient body motion and breathing. And all of a sudden I'm like, man, this is incredible how empowering this is. I mean, it really was it's so much more than just physical empowerment. My mind was just kind of exploding with the possibilities of what this could become and how much fun it was to kind of learn in the mental way how the best way to use my body is in some kind of engagement. So that was really exciting for me.
Cool. And there's a tactical side to this. So let's go a little bit deeper into it and expose, really what the core of jiu-jitsu is. And when you're in that very first lesson, you've had now, I guess, let's say you've had this one-on-one with the coach, the instructor, we call them the professor in jiu-jitsu. And this guy's had a chance to assess your skills just physically so he knows where you can get placed in terms of training. Now, everyone's welcome to start training, but obviously they're going to place you based off of physical capabilities to begin with. So imagine you had, pretty good physical capabilities, guy in his early 20s, a guy who's physically fit, who's played sports, all that stuff, but just knows no technique. So now you get to class for the first day and you learn, there's a position where you have to fight from your back. And then there's the position where you're fighting from the top position. Then there's the position when you're fighting from the side, which we call side control. Just technically and tactically take us through that first day. And what kind of coursework did you go through? What did you learn on a more tactical level? Yeah.
So what was really exciting about the first day was I just remember walking away and saying, this this is just so applicable to my life. Like, this is real life scenarios, and these are real things that could happen. So it's exciting to me. All of a sudden, what I'm learning is really getting absorbed, and I'm internalizing it at such a deeper level because I see the practical applications kind of all around me. But essentially, you walk in there, you got your gi on, you feel like you're a 7-year-old showing up for karate practice. You're not really sure what time you're supposed to show up. You don't know how to tie your freaking belt. I don't know how to get my jiu-jitsu pants on correctly. Let's just say insecurity might be the word that's just bubbling over a little bit, because you're just completely out of your comfort zone, right? And you're looking at every single person and they've got a different gi on. It's got a logo on it. You're like, oh, this guy must be a really bad, he must be the best guy in the gym or whatever. And all of a sudden, you haven't even started fighting, and there's all these kinds of mental warfare that's already taking place. But the way that you start, and what jiu-jitsu is, I've heard it described as a dance or as chess, like you were talking about, that it's really all about learning positions and learning counters. And all they talked about my first lesson was the flow. You got to feel the flow of energy. That's what's going to dictate the next move. You're going to manipulate your opponent as opposed to being the aggressor, and then you're going to, establish some kind of dominant position. But essentially, we start off doing all these warm-ups, getting the blood flowing. We would do these things called elbow escapes, which is really just the most efficient way to break out of holds, to break out of someone being on top of you, so that you can try to establish and move to a higher level position. And some of the folks that are listening to this podcast that will really feel stimulated are people that are big thinkers, because jiu-jitsu is not for dummies. It's not. No. I mean, it is a thinking art. And so we're doing these techniques, learning how to move your body, doing front rolls, doing back rolls, learning how to position yourself. And it was completely uncomfortable. I can tell you, my head's rattling around. I'm standing up and I'm dizzy, and I'm like, I hope no one looks at me because I'm about to fall over here and now. And then what we would do is, after we've done all of our warm-ups, we've worked on some of kind of the fundamental movements, we go right into headlock escapes, right? And anyone that's known anything about fighting knows that usually it's going to go to the ground, and usually someone is going to try to take control of your head. And so what we did, Shane, and this is the way that a lot of Gracie gyms will train, is essentially you train for one position for a whole week, and you'll learn different counters, right? So I know that, hey, if he throws me to the ground, I'm going to chase his legs, and I'm going to try to get a hook. And that's what, for people that don't know, that's just talk about using your legs as kind of another flexible, applicable outer extremity, as opposed to just thinking about using your arms in regular hand-to-hand combat. And so really, we were just learning about headlock escapes, and if he moves to this position, then I'm going to do this. And if he has a counter for that, then I'm going to move right into here. And I've got this endless repertoire of counters and positions that I'm just going to continue to throw at him until I find something that works. And it was really, really fun, really exciting, but also, like I said, really uncomfortable. And I know that's something we want to really hit on for people is understanding why that discomfort is really a positive thing, why that's a good thing, something we should embrace in our lives.
Yeah, we've heard the phrase growth through discomfort, or, suffering breeds success. Things like that are definitely applicable in the jiu-jitsu world, because in jiu-jitsu, you can literally be getting your butt kicked for 60 minutes during a training session. But what you find out about yourself is so incredibly valuable. I mean, you find out how you handle significant challenges. When there's a guy who's on top of you and potentially like looking to put some kind of crazy baseball choke on the neck, which is a choke you would use with the gi, can be pretty painful on the trachea. How do you respond to that as an individual? It's kind of like having your back up against the wall. You know what I'm saying, Cade?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think about the holistic applications, that this is something that you want to do in every aspect of your life, physically and mentally and emotionally, to push yourself. I mean, we all know how it feels to be in a class where the professor's up on the board. It's probably math or science. And all of a sudden, he's talking about how this concept flows right into this equation, and he's just going. And everybody else is nodding your head, and you're sitting there saying, oh, crap, I have no idea what's going on. And all of a sudden, your body is having mental stimulation that is not occurring correctly, and you're sweating. I mean, I remember sitting in my microeconomics class in college saying, holy crap, I don't know how these things are relating to each other. But then I think back and I look back with an undergrad and several years of experience under my belt, how much being pushed in those kind of ways mentally helped me. And then it should be the same way that we think about all of these aspects of our lives. So physically pushing yourself, pushing your heart, pushing your body, always breaking barriers and new ranges of motion and new techniques and new levels of discomfort that we get good at. And that's what's going to create growth. That's what's going to create the next platform of success for us that we're going to be able to climb onto every single time. And we're going to continue to build that pyramid going upward. And so that's what I've found that jiu-jitsu's helped me with a lot. I mean, gosh, it affects the way that I look at my coworkers when I walk into work. I'm telling you, it has this holistic effect of some confidence, of some excitement, of some just changing your mindset from bad or hard means bad, and that means I need to run from it, or something that's discomforting or trying is something I need to run from, as opposed to something that I need to run towards. Being comfortable in the uncomfortable, kind of, even that CrossFit mentality, training for the unknown and the unknowable, that you can put me in any situation and I'm going to figure out how to respond. And I've seen it impact my life in so many ways in just 8 weeks, and I can tell you that every single time I think I've gotten comfortable, I find a new level of discomfort. And just to give everyone a taste, I'm getting to this point now where I'm about to move from the tier 1 in jiu-jitsu to tier 2, which is essentially where you just do a little more rolling. You do a little more live sparring as opposed to just practicing techniques, because they want to make sure that you kind of have a good fundamental base and things like that, and that you have a good grasp of the concepts. So I'm feeling a little bit confident, right? I've just been practicing these techniques against people that aren't really fighting back. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And so they're like, yeah, Cade, let's roll today. I'm like, cool. Let's start me off with someone easy. Start me off with someone that I'm more athletic than or stronger than that, and maybe I can make up for my lack of experience with the techniques. And no, that's not how it worked out. They go and they pin me up against Eric Williams, who, if no one knows who he might be, but he's the first black belt in jiu-jitsu in all of Houston. He's like a 5th degree black belt. He's been training jiu-jitsu for like 20 freaking years. Yeah. He was an elite high school wrestler that had Olympic hopes until he had actually a vertebrae injury, and he had to change the way that he trained. But the point is, I spent the next 10 minutes of my life getting pounded, getting flipped, getting absolutely frustrated. And actually, the harder I tried, the less success that I had. And it was funny because in that time of uncomfortableness and in that time of kind of the unknown, all I thought to do, Shane, was to strain, to bear down, was to fight as hard as I could. And what I found out was that was my undoing. It was that I wasn't taking my time. I wasn't thinking through what's the right technique to use. What's the next flow of energy? Where's it taking me? And Eric kind of gave me this pointer afterwards, and I really internalized it. He just said, Cade, you're going 80 miles an hour. You need to go 65. You're missing some scenery here. So it was a very humbling experience. But again, it's another opportunity to grow. And I went home and threw my guts up, cleaned myself off, and got ready for class the next day. So
I love it. Well, Bobby, you remember the story, The Search for Bobby Fischer? It was a book and then later made into a movie. I know you were a bit of a chess nerd in high school. Remember that book?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, that book was actually based on a guy named Josh Waitzkin. For people who don't know Josh Waitzkin's name, Josh Waitzkin is a grandmaster in chess, like one of the greatest American young chess prodigies of all time. And he's also the very first black belt under Marcelo Garcia, and helped him start a jiu-jitsu gym in New York City, which is now one of the prominent gyms in the world. And Josh Waitzkin talks about the reset, Cade. And that reminds me a little bit of the experience you were going through. You're kind of moving on all cylinders. You maybe are feeling good at first, and then all of a sudden you get your back smashed against the wall, and all of a sudden you're trying to find a way to get out of this uncomfortable position, and you just can't. You're literally trapped by a person who's advanced or superior or has some dominant position on you. And he talks about the reset. You constantly have to press the reset button and think a few plays ahead, just as a chess player might when an opponent makes an advantageous move on you and takes a high quality piece. You have to kind of catch yourself, reset, pause. There's no reason to react right away. Get your bearings, and then make the next move. And it might just be something really tiny, right, Cade? You're learning that it's a game of inches. It might just be as much as escaping the elbow so he no longer has wrist control on my left arm. Then with that wrist, I can grab the upper portion of the gi. And then I can slowly and methodically start working myself into a position where I can sweep my opponent. Now, you're up against a black belt. It's going to take some time. But that's the mindset, and I love that mindset about chess and jiu-jitsu alike. But Cade, there was one other. Oh, go ahead.
Well, so what you were saying really resonates with me, in that what happens when we get uncomfortable and we're established in some kind of position that is strange for us, and this is not just jujitsu, this is anything, is all of a sudden our body, we it starts to control itself as opposed to our mind enacting control and breaking down the task, breaking down the concept, breaking down the problem, and then constantly moving in some kind of linear fashion to try to solve that problem. And what I find is that when I'm thrown into those corners, when the lights get turned off, when something's been taken away from me, all of a sudden that problem becomes this massive thing that I no longer have any ability to break down, and my body starts to react and my mind loses control over my body. And then from that point on, I've really got nothing to rely on, because I'm no longer thinking, right? And that's exactly what you'd expect to happen if you see an altercation in the street or in the bar. The guy that has more control over his mind, that can control his mind when there's all these other factors that are trying to take away control, like loudness or some kind of stimulation, or guys trying to throw blows on you. The guy that can control his mind in that situation and move methodically towards the proper conclusion, that's who's going to have success.
Right. And it's hard to get there without having tested it. You really have to test yourself and experience that time and time again before you can start to do the Josh Waitzkin reset and start looking for the smallest. He talks about the concentric circles and how you should want to kind of close in on the problem, which is this massive problem. I'm getting beat up and I feel uncomfortable and my heart's pounding. Take that down to the smallest problem possible that you can actually influence, which is, oh, he's controlling my left wrist, and I need my wrist back if I'm going to do anything. Okay, let's find a way to break that wrist lock. So I love that idea of just breaking things down and then rebuilding them, breaking down the problem statement and then rebuilding them. But there's another facet of jiu-jitsu maybe that we haven't touched on. I tried a bit in the first statement regarding my experiences in the Marine Corps, and that's measuring yourself against a competitor. We haven't talked about like what it's like to literally face another human being who's going to attempt to will themselves on you, and you are going to have to kind of respond with your own willpower. What's it like to look another guy in the eyes and of a 5-minute rolling session, who the better man was on that day? What's that like for you?
Yeah, it is an experience unlike I've had in many other situations, partly because of everybody's background, has some kind of constraints, but maybe if you only played team sports, right? You only played team sports. There's not a lot of single, isolated, one-on-one moments, except for, maybe a baseball pitcher or a wide receiver and a cornerback, something like that. So often you have other people to rescue you. You have other people to look to when things aren't going your way and you're like, oh crap, look to the star player to bail me out. And so when you're just looking at this person, it's really it's just an interesting battle, kind of like tennis, when you just have this supreme focus of one person on another person. But I can tell you, when I'm rolling with someone, oftentimes you get into these neutral positions where both people are trying to increase their odds. So it's 50-50 in these two positions, and I'm trying to get my odds up to 55 or 60 by taking a leg or by moving into side control or by getting out of his guard and into the half guard or something like that. I'm trying to incrementally increase the odds that I have of achieving success in my outcome. And what's so amazing is so often I stop thinking about what I'm supposed to do and I lock eyes with my competitor, and I'm just hoping that he will quit. I'm just hoping that he's going to run out of gas. Like we both got our foot full down on the pedal, pedal to the metal, full throttle action. It's like, gosh, if he doesn't stop soon, I'm not sure when I'm going to quit, because all I'm focused on is how this guy's performing. And really, I'd imagine that to fix that type of thinking, I need to think about that reset button. Yeah. I need to focus on what can I do now to control this outcome as best I can, versus totally hoping that this person's just going to run out of energy or is just going to kind of give me a position because he's tired or he's, he can't hang on as long as I can. And that's something that if I really want to improve, I'm going to have to figure out how to kind of overcome that in the middle of a heated battle.
Yeah. And then I want to expand on the physicality of it. You talked about how the average ConocoPhillips worker doesn't have much physical contact with anyone other than maybe their wife or husband. But let's be honest, how frequently are two people that physically engaged with one another? In this case, in all-out war of some variant. it's very rare, unless you're playing a contact sport of some kind. So was that a bit odd for you at first, or were you comfortable because of our experiences growing up fighting all the time?
Yeah, I think I was. I will say grappling or sparring with some girls has been a little strange because that's not something that you necessarily think about engaging with another girl in some kind of physical combat on a day-to-day basis. But I can tell you, some of these girls will kick your freaking butt. They know what they're doing, and oftentimes they're a lot more flexible, and they're actually really, really good. It seems like typically at moving methodically, as opposed to a guy that just a lot of times it gets emotional and wants to take over with brute force. And so that can sometimes be our undoing. But yeah, absolutely. The physical aspect is something that is so important to me because, I mean, along with all of the things that we talked about that were additions to me wanting to do jiu-jitsu, you also have this last and kind of most rudimentary reason. I want to stay in good shape. I want to test my heart. I want to keep on working out. And what I kind of found was, and I would imagine there's lots of people out there today that are really frustrated with fitness. Either they're out of shape and they're overweight and they can't get motivated to do it, or they're stuck in this rut of just kind of going to lift weights or going to run on the treadmill or just kind of going and always doing the same type of thing. And it's not fun, it's boring, and it's not something that's motivating. And that's what's something that's so cool about jiu-jitsu is it's fantastic exercise. It's holistic training. I mean, it's cardiovascular, it's muscular. There's lots of different systems that are being tested in that space. And I'd actually probably argue that there's muscles that you can't use unless you're engaging with another person in combat. It's literally impossible to work them out. So you're always going to have untapped potential when you don't do any kind of engagement with another human being. So I found that to be such a burst of motivation, kind of just this freshness that was breathed into my physical fitness life that's kind of renewed my motivation again for fitness because it's testable, right? I'm going in there every single day. I'm trying to get better at a certain move or a certain position. You have the belt structure in jiu-jitsu, so you're kind of always trying to advance to get some stripes on your belt and move upwards in your technique. And then also it's tried against all different types of people every single day. I mean, I might train against the guy that's 240 pounds one day or against a girl that's 110 pounds. And what we always talk about is everybody's body is different. You can't just respond the same way in every situation. And so that kind of well-roundedness, that kind of holistic type of training is what I was looking for. And I've been extremely satisfied in what I've seen because I just see so many people that have the same problem I do. They're just bored. They're tired of their similar repetitive, reproducible fitness regimens. So,
yeah. And we're talking about serious stuff here. We keep using the word combat, which might be over exaggerating things a little bit. Kate, tell us about like the kind of people that you've been interacting with at the gym. Who are most of these guys? Are most of these guys young 20-year-olds who are training for the UFC or what?
Well, so Houston is the most diverse city in the United States. But obviously, it depends on how you rate diversity, but it's extremely diverse. And you can imagine that people that are going towards mixed martial arts, there's not this classic even racial or ethnic breakdown that you can go and say, hey, I'm going to walk into a gym. I'm going to see 10 white guys, 2 black guys, an Asian, and a Hispanic. It is unbelievably diverse in terms of ages, in terms of gender, in terms of race. It's really, really cool. You have all different types of people. You got blue collar workers. You got high level elite scholarly engineers. We had a guy the other day who's a brown belt training my class who trains in gyms all over the world because he got his PhD in mathematics at Rice University and works for some organization doing research. So he's always traveling the world. And while he does that, he trains jiu-jitsu with everybody. So the communal aspect of jiu-jitsu is something that's really amazing because you're with all these different people. Everyone's not quite sure how to respond to each other, but you have this one singular motivation for being in there, and that's improving your physical fitness and getting better at the art of jiu-jitsu. And it's amazing to see the community that's built around these organizations or these contexts where there's some grit. people are sweating and bleeding together, that just bonds people together in a way that you might not understand unless you've played sports or you've been in the military or you've partaken in some kind of community where that is just an agent. It's like super glue. All of a sudden, you are just so close with these people because you're mutually sharpening each other. You all have different things to bring to the table. Some people are really strong. Some people are flexible. Some people have a great motor. And so you're constantly kind of figuring out, how does my puzzle piece fit into this person's puzzle piece? And we talk about it oftentimes. Our professors will talk about it, right? Is we're always trying to help each other get better at jiu-jitsu. And sometimes that's through going really hard. And sometimes that's through slowing down and helping people, practice the parts of the technique that are a little bit elusive to them. So,
yeah, the community is incredible. I get to travel a lot, and I've now trained jiu-jitsu in 4 different continents, plan to train it on every continent that I'm living in for whatever period of time. And I've had no problems rolling into a new host city that I'm spending time in. For example, I'm in Buenos Aires right now. There's 4 or 5 jiu-jitsu gyms. I send out some emails, say, hey guys, who will welcome someone from Coyoteras jiu-jitsu facility in San Jose, which is where I got my professional training or whatever. And they're always wide arms open. Come on in, come train with us. And it's always, as you said, a diverse background of people. You've got 50-year-old fathers of 4, and then you've got the young 20-something who's training mixed martial arts seriously. But you get everything in between. And that's one of the things that's just fantastic about the community. It really is open to anyone. I think that people shouldn't be scared about getting injured as well. Like, we talk about the combat thing, but tell us, Kate, about the aspects of injuries. What's it like when a guy's really cranking on your arm or about to choke you out? How do you prevent yourself from getting injured?
Yeah, well, you touched on it a little bit earlier, and this is something to really grasp about jiu-jitsu before you get involved in it. Otherwise, it might be something that prevents you from ever getting involved in it altogether. And that the goal of jiu-jitsu, as opposed to boxing, as opposed to wrestling, as opposed to any other thing, is just to keep from getting hurt. That's literally the goal of jiu-jitsu. In its most primitive form, it is a martial art that is designed around self-defense. And so if I can escape and run away, that's the goal. My goal is just not to get crushed. And so unlike boxing, where you're going to continue to fight until someone is no longer conscious or someone no longer can physically go on, jiu-jitsu is really a more efficient way to get to those endings through what you talked about, the submissions, the chokes, the leg locks, the arm bars, because the goal is to not necessarily hurt the other person. The goal is to get to such an advantaged position that you can hurt them if they don't willingly submit and end the fight themselves. And so that's what's something that's so cool, is that you can train 100% dead on and not really be too worried about something happening, everything barred except for a freak accident or, anything. Anyone can get hurt, doing anything. There's all different types of scenarios. But for the most part, what you find is that I have complete control over ending the fight anytime I want. As soon as I tap out, or as soon as I say it, I don't even have to touch the mat. I say tap, tap, tap. People are going to immediately relinquish because I've submitted in the fight. That's how the fight ends. And so really, I would say it's one of the safest forms of martial arts because of that element of how a fight is begun and ended, of course.
Yeah. And on that note, now that we're really getting high on jiu-jitsu, in boxing, if you're going to spar with someone, you're getting punched in the nose. So of course you could break your nose. You could have these other serious injuries. But in general, when 2 guys are sparring in a boxing ring, which I've done a number of times and which I've seen done numbers of times in gyms, if you're really going 100%, someone's going to get hurt. There's no doubt about it. You're going to get knocked out, or you're going to at least walk away shaken up and probably on the disabled list for a number of days, if both guys are literally going at 100%. And this is one of the magic pieces to jiu-jitsu, because unlike in boxing, where you really have to be going at like a 60% click in sparring, or in other martial arts like karate or taekwondo, which I won't go into, but rarely even make contact and are therefore rarely even challenging the validity of the art. In jiu-jitsu, you can go 100% and nobody has to get hurt. One guy can be a black belt, and Cade, one guy can be a white belt. And if you're both going 100%, the fight's going to end quickly, but it ends with the submission. It ends with the tap out. And then, I wonder if you had this experience, it ends with the 2 guys embracing, saying, well done, here's how we can do better next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on a lot of big points there. And that is part of what's so attractive about jiu-jitsu. And I've trained with now several black belts. And usually the way that sparring works is looks like them going, 50%, 60% or something like that, and really helping me kind of develop my techniques. And these guys are stronger when they're black belts. They're more flexible, they're more agile, and they're way mentally, they're 7 steps ahead of me than what I'm trying to do. And so that mental challenge along with that physical challenge had just helps me to improve a lot more. And again, like you said, it's really all about the collective growth of the community, getting better and better and better. And that's part of what's so cool about being able to train self-defense with your friends is you don't have to worry about getting knocked out, but you can go hard enough to give someone a real look so that, if there ever is the situation at the mall where someone, wants to take your wife's purse or you're at a bar and someone's drinking a little bit too much, you have such a mental advantage in that place to try to keep things de-escalated, right? We even talk about sometimes how to speak to people in the middle of a confrontation, right? Because it's all about the primary outcome is me getting away fine. And so that might look like engaging, it might look like not engaging. That's obviously the primary scenario that we would want to achieve. But yeah, absolutely, you have that mutual embracing. Again, it's just something, it's a glue that just pastes people together is when they're undergoing some kind of adversity or some kind of physical challenge. And it's something that is so healthy for the community. And my goodness, people that go down to the gym, they go down there and train for an hour and they stay for 2 more hours just hanging out and cutting up and hanging out with people because that's what they love to do. And it's really a fun place to spend time.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So if people were interested in getting started in jiu-jitsu, outside of going and signing up tomorrow, for those that like to research, those like you and I, the pseudo scholars, we like to tear stuff apart, really overanalyze things to death, and then maybe we'll make a decision about what we're going to do. So if you wanted to overanalyze stuff, have you seen any cool documentaries, read any cool books, got any cool resources where people could learn more about jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously Google is a phenomenal tool for anything these days. I know someone called our iPhones the other day the wonder killers because we never have to wonder about anything else. So if you want to learn anything about anything, we hop on the internet. A couple of resources that I would throw out there is a documentary called Choked. It's about Rickson Gracie, which is one of the sons of the 2 brothers that started jiu-jitsu, and it's kind of commonly referred to as the greatest jiu-jitsu artist of all time. And it's about his Vale Tudo fights, and Vale Tudo just means no holds bar. There's literally no rules. This is the most primitive way of measuring yourself against someone else's. They would invite a sumo wrestler, someone that does shoot fighting, someone that does Muay Thai, a kickboxer, whatever it may be. Let's bring these arts together and let's test. And so it's all about his fights in Vale Tudo in Japan, I think in 97 and 98. And it's about how Rickson approaches fighting versus what the differences are in some of these other types of arts. And he's obviously victorious, but it's a really, really cool picture of what jiu-jitsu's like. And then also there's a kind of the Gracies in action. So that's a bunch of parts on YouTube. So if you just type in Gracies in action, you'll see part 1 through 5. And what it is just clips of the last literally 50 years of different Gracies fighting different types of martial arts. It might be another jiu-jitsu person, or it might be someone completely different, and it was kind of their proving grounds when they were building up their name and building up the name of jiu-jitsu. And so if you want to kind of see, does this kind of stuff work? What does this look like if I go fight someone a lot bigger? All of those scenarios are really exposed in those couple of materials and documentaries that I mentioned, and it'll give you a little bit of taste for the history, and it will also kind of explain this last key point that is so interesting about jiu-jitsu to me is it's really not about the Gracie name even. Even the Gracies are not really about expanding their name. They just truly believe that what they're carrying is the answer to what martial artists have been looking for thousands and thousands of years, which is what's the most effective way to defend myself in hand-to-hand combat. And they think that that's it. So that's their point for creating these materials and trying to build their brand is not to expand their name, but really to expand jiu-jitsu, because they want everyone to know jiu-jitsu, because they truly believe the world's a better place if everyone knows how to defend themselves. And we kind of, it's part of the evolution of mankind, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Jiu-jitsu is a real superpower. You know jiu-jitsu, you got a leg up on just about everybody else until you come across the guy who knows jiu-jitsu better than you. But the reality is most people who've been training jiu-jitsu and who've come up in these schools have a fair amount of respect and honor. And I'm amazed that big macho men type guys can roll into the gym and they all check their egos at the door. You know, we have to. There's no way you could go in with a major ego because you're going to get it reset quickly. So I'd find that, to just caveat on that point, that people who've trained jiu-jitsu are the kind of people that are walking around with their shoulders back and have the self-confidence that know that if something bad happens, they're going to be able to take care of the situation for themselves or for others, but they're not the kind of people who are trying to go out and inflict pain. It's just a lot of good quality people training jiu-jitsu from my experiences, Cade.
Yeah, absolutely. And so learning a little bit about the history, learning a little bit about the purpose, maybe taking a little bit of an introspective look into, kind of doing a little bit of an audit of where you stand in terms of asking yourself those kind of critical questions. Do I push myself? Do I push myself in all facets of my life, and especially physically? What does my fitness life look like? And could training jiu-jitsu, training some kind of form of martial art, be something that's really stimulating and helpful to all these other areas of my life?
Yeah.
And so if the answer is yes to those questions, certainly something to take a deeper dive into.
Yeah, and there's one other article, or not article, but resource that we would be remiss if we didn't mention, especially for any of those fight fans out there that maybe like the UFC or are interested, have seen it on the television. You got to check out UFC 1, 2, and 3. You got to look at the early days of Royce Gracie, this little 170-pound nothing Brazilian rolling in. And in those days, the UFC had no weight class when it first got started.
Yeah.
There was no mitts. You didn't wear gloves of any kind. And you just rolled in and you went mano a mano against whoever showed up that day. And just see what Royce was able to do in his gi at 170 pounds against these big, giant, brawling American kind of bar fighter types. And I think that's a pretty quick depiction of how valuable jiu-jitsu is and why it is sort of a superior art.
Yeah, no. And that's a good point, because lots of people out there don't realize that the Gracies started UFC. They started UFC and sold it to Dana White, Rorion Gracie, who was the first brother to come over stateside and really kind of market the brand. And again, this is because they wanted to show to the world this is the most elite form of self-defense and form of martial art, and it's superior in all ways. We don't have to be bigger or stronger. We'll kick anybody's tail, and that's really kind of cool. It really is just like capitalism, right? There's a new form of martial art that was created and developed, and now it's the best. And you see that in UFC now, that there's even everyone's training jiu-jitsu. Everyone's having to train all different types of martial arts, because I've got to have a complete set of tools if I'm going to go and defeat someone that has a bunch of tools as well. And so what you really see is just the building up, the edification of martial arts in general, really most tested explicitly in the UFC. So it's fun to see how all of those arts are really shaping and sharpening each other, giving us a way better package and a way more entertaining UFC even than it was back then when Royce was tapping people out in 2 minutes every single time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think we've probably overanalyzed jiu-jitsu to death. It's such a fun topic. I mean, martial arts in general are awesome. Just forcing yourself out of your comfort zone, challenging yourself against an individual opponent, I think, as Cade alluded to, is really grows you in a way that no other experience that I've ever had in life can really grow me. And so from that perspective, Cade, do you think other people should try jiu-jitsu? And if they could or should, where should they get started, and how could they even find a jiu-jitsu gym?
Yeah, so like you said, Shane, you've trained it all over the world, and just sending an email, it's amazing the resources we have at our fingertips now. You can get a hold of a million different contacts of people that train jiu-jitsu all over the place. And so just running a simple Google search on jiu-jitsu academies, a lot of them will be named after the Gracies if that's something that you're explicitly looking for. But of course, that's what jiu-jitsu is. But yeah, most of them are going to do that. They're going to also have kind of a free barometer test class, so to speak, where you can just kind of come in there and see what it's all about. And guess what? You're never going to know if you don't try it. So it is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be a little bit strange just walking into a new place, trying something totally new. But we've kind of harped on why that is such a positive thing. So something you're interested in, check out jiu-jitsu academies in your local area. I guarantee you there's one nearby, and you can start training in the next couple weeks.
Sweet. Well, you and I both have some training to do this week, but since you're the newbie to jiu-jitsu, I get to issue this week's challenge. So every week on the podcast, we want to at least test ourselves when we're not actually live on air. So this week, Cade, we've got a challenge or an experiment. You've been training for what, 8 weeks now?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, 8 weeks now. So obviously still a white belt. For people who don't know, you can stay at a belt level for many years. I mean, there's people who are brown belts, the level right before black belt, for an entire decade. There are people who are white belts for 3 years plus. So it takes some time to go up in belt. So Cade, your challenge this week, since you're a Stinemetz and you're my brother, I expect a little higher out of you. Your challenge this week before next podcast is to submit a blue belt. Tap them out. You got it?
Yeah. I'm gonna probably have to go do some scoping out and see if I can maybe even get a hold of the roster list and see who was promoted most recently. But that sounds like a fun challenge. I'll throw myself into it in training this week.
Great. Next week we'll follow up and see how you did getting on trying to tap out the blue belt. But I guess just in closing, we can allude to what's coming up on the podcast. So as we've said, our podcast, we're the Pseudo Scholars. Next week, we're going to get outside of this jiu-jitsu world for those that are less interested in the martial arts and that kind of thing. And we're going to dive into politics a little bit, we might say. We're going to ask ourselves, are we making up our own minds, or is the media making them up for us? So pretty deep stuff. And
I can't think of a better topic to dive into with what's going on and just kind of the political climate of the United States right now. So I'm looking forward to doing a little bit of research and coming in with a viewpoint and testing it out and breaking it down and building it back up and seeing if we can figure out what that answer to that question might be.
Great. Well, I think that's it for this week. So I will see you next week, little brother.
All right. Later, big brother.